Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait. Raymond.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And our guest for another session of Media Watch is Dr. Alan Singer.
Hi.
Okay,
Hi, Raymond.
Brought to you by the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network and EVT Educational Productions. Dr. Singer, just self-intro a little bit. Tell folks about your background.
All right, I'm a professor of secondary education at Hofstra University. I'm a former New York City high school teacher, and I'm a historian in one of my major areas. And I just published a new book on...
and they couldn't see that, so hold it up a little bit and then tell them the title.
New York's Grand Emancipation Jubilee. It's about the New York State abolitionists and the struggle to end slavery.
Fantastic.
SUNY Press.
Fantastic, because all that agitation and the struggle to end slavery was basically the 19th century struggle that we're having today in the struggle to end gun violence in this country. Apropos.
Very apropos.
So, I mean, basically, there are a number of issues we want to touch on, and we might as well start with the big story that's still in the news. And because we're pre-taping, but by next Monday when we air, there's no doubt that the march, which had all kinds of titles, but the March to Save Our Lives, the Parkland, Florida student-led march against gun violence, for gun control. We're taping the middle of the week after that phenomenal march. And Dr. Singer, you participated. Give us a little quick rundown of what it was like and why you were there.
All right. First, I got to say, I've been working with high school age students for my entire career, and I was extraordinarily impressed with the young people from Florida. Their ability to speak, to raise issues, to stay on focus, and to work hard. So, yes, they experienced an incredible trauma that stimulated this, but they had the ability to respond, which I have to say is a credit to public education, which everybody keeps denouncing. So, on the first on March 14th, which was the anniversary
of the shooting in Parkland, Florida, at Marjory Stoneman Douglas.
Right. At St. Valentine's Day. My grandchildren go to a middle school in Brooklyn. It's called Brooklyn Prospect. And they wanted to participate in the walkout. And the school made the requirement that if you wanted to participate, you first have to write an explanation of why, and then you had to get parental consent. And my grandson did a really great piece. And I posted it on Daily Kos, and it was then reprinted on the answer sheet on the Washington Post.
Very
and
nice.
He just talked about how upsetting it was and how he cared about the other people, and he had to walk out in support for them. I've also traveled around to schools and spoke with other people. One of the things that concerned me, however, there were a number of schools in the New York metropolitan region that punished students who participated.
Yeah.
On Long Island, at least 6 schools gave students in-house suspension.
Yeah.
And the governor and the state education commissioner both said, what are you doing this for? They're supposed to be involved in these kinds of things. And Governor Cuomo marched on the 14th with students from Manhattan, and Mayor de Blasio marched with students from Brooklyn. So again, there was tremendous local impetus building up to the 24th.
24th, right.
I went to the one in the city rather than one in Washington, primarily because I wanted to be able to go with my grandchildren.
Right.
And your grandson is how old?
Well, they're twins. It's a boy-girl twin. They're both 13. The girl went with Dad, and the boy went with me. And because there's 200,000 people there, you had to make sure they were okay.
That's just New York.
That's just New York.
No, my point is, though, that they were not children just following the lead of their parents. They're old enough to make up their own mind.
Very much. And they had, again, but it's funny, my stepdaughter said to me, did you help him write his speech for school? And I said, no, I edited a little bit of the grammar, the tense. He wrote that, not me. They were very moved, along with all these other young people. And that's why when you reference the struggle against slavery, they took it very personally. And I think that when people take an issue very personally, they respond. And that's why there's been such an upsurge.
You're getting to the heart of, because Ray and I on the previous show, and Bob Anthony, our other co-host on the show before that, we're talking about the fact that the pundits and all the folk were just, in a sense, questioning whether or not these young people were motivated enough, dedicated enough, whether this was just going to be a fad.
Or paid actors.
Yeah, paid actors. This whole bit about, oh, well, just an excuse to get out of school and all that. And so we had a discussion, which I don't mind recapping, which was recounting the fact that we got out of Vietnam because young people said we ain't going to be in that war anymore. And in the 60s, they marched, demonstrated. Some took it to the far extreme and blew things up. But talk about commitment. Those were young people. And
young
then
people in Birmingham.
young people in the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying.
Absolutely.
We use the two preeminent, most recent historical examples of why young people always end up being the driving motivators to make the change happen. The fact that the commentators on media, left or right, were questioning whether they had the resolve, the stick-to-itiveness, the desire to make the change, I just rolled my eyes and said, where is their contextualization of even recent history if they don't even understand that?
Right. These kids were working 24/7. They were writing speeches based on evidence. You know, it's our Common Core dream. They were running around the country. There was a young woman from Florida came up to Massapequa, New York, to meet with school officials who threatened to punish kids who walked out. I mean, they were holding themselves to the highest level. Now, adults helped with the organization. Someone had to put up money and make arrangements for the march. That's true. But it was these young people gave the impetus to the rally.
Yeah,
I think that's the key.
And I commend them.
I have
Absolutely.
So Raymond, we're talking about, at one of the earlier shows, about the fact that because the issue is the biggest hot button issue, the only other bigger hot button issue than guns, and it may not be, is abortion in this country, folk. You push those two buttons and everybody go crazy, especially on the far right. The left people go crazy over abortion just as much as the right, but the left normally doesn't go as crazy about guns and gun control as the as the right. And so once this became the focus, when these kids just stood up and said enough is enough, of course, needless to say, they got demonized by the far right. So let's take a little look at some of the media coverage.
But before we get into that, I'd like to point something out. A lot of people are misunderstanding. We were calling for a ban on assault rifles. Now, an AR-15 is not technically an assault rifle. Technically, an assault rifle is a selective fire rifle, which means you can fire it one shot at a time or hold the trigger down and it'll continue to fire as long as you hold the trigger down. That is not the case with an AR-15 unless it's modified or fitted with a bump stock. So don't let your people in Congress or wherever fool you. If they ban, if there's an assault weapon ban, it's not banning the AR-15.
Well, but
It
here's
has
the
to be
thing.
specifically named.
Here's the thing. I listened to a lot of the speeches. I saw recaps of the speeches, and I saw the right's diatribe about the signs that were made. And those signs that were made were all across the spectrum. There are people who said, yeah, get rid of all guns. There are people who said, yeah, get rid of all assault weapons. Get rid of whatever, whatever. And as Justice Stevens, former Justice Stevens, came out in an op-ed recently, repeal the Second Amendment. So there are people who have gotten to the point where they've said, enough of this carnage, enough of this killing. I don't care whether there's a Second Amendment or not, and we've had a discussion on how it's being misinterpreted. We won't go back down that road for this course. But across the board, this outpouring of people in all these cities, not just in this country, folk, there were demonstrations in other cities across the globe. I heard, and now don't quote me on this, I didn't check it, I heard there was co-walkouts on every continent except Antarctica. That might be hyperbole.
Well, they said
but
800 cities.
Really?
My point is, when you get 800 cities, you're covering a lot of the globe. so I'm taking the every continent except Antarctica as a grain of salt, but trust me, there were a lot of people in solidarity. So I think the phrase that they used to use is paradigm shift. Well, I think we may have hit the paradigm shift because of these young people. And because they've been so vocal and because they've been so articulate, they have been totally lambasted by the far right. And I'll give you a quote that The Guardian, which again, we have mentioned The Guardian more than once on Media Watch, folks, because that's a British-based journalistic organization, newspaper, but they have a United States arm. And that United States arm does as good or better than any of our frontline newspapers in this country. And The Guardian, and Alan, you can speak to what they have done on this, but their follow-up to the attacks at these young people, it says how right-wingers have attacked Parkland students with lies, hoaxes, and smears. And it's written by a young man by the name of Jason Wilson. I don't know how young he is. Guardian, Monday, March 26. And here's the opening lead. As of this weekend, that's the weekend past, this group of idealistic young people have officially become the right's leading hate figures. Couldn't say it any better. No. They are the major targets of the alt-right, 4chan, Breitbart, you name it. And it's not just the alt-right.
No, they've accused them, as you said, of being paid actors. They've been running smears about their personalities, about their sexualities, and anything to embarrass or humiliate them. And again, I just wanted, one of the things that The Guardian did that was so impressive is it had the staff of the Stoneman Douglas Eagle's Eye, that's the newspaper,
right?
Write the coverage for the rallies. And these young student journalists wrote up a manifesto on gun control that The Guardian then promoted. So The Guardian has done what no U.S. newspaper source has done. I'm very impressed, giving a broad voice to these young people. Just one other youth-led movement we should not neglect is the Soweto movement against apartheid was led by high school students.
That's exactly right.
1976.
So we didn't even go international. We just stayed local when we mentioned it. But if you look, even in 1968, all the student uprisings in Europe was awash in student uprisings in 1968 that totally turned that continent upside down. Those were all young students. So this bit about they're not going to have enough stick-to-itiveness and they don't have whatever it takes. I'm sitting here laughing because that's wishful thinking. As somebody said, the NRA has finally met its match as far as I'm concerned. That's my prediction, and I'm not the only one predicting it now.
Well, I want to add one thing, and that is throughout history there have been these kind of uprisings of anger. The key is it has to be transformed now into institutional activity. And there has to be institutions that carry it on into the electoral process. A good example is the civil rights movement. You know, we look at Montgomery's 1955. And from 1955 until the sit-downs in 1661, there's a hiatus. And there's not, you can't have constant upset. You have to take the upset and transform it into organization. That's the next big step.
So tell me what, because I was working on the documentary that we were working on about the city of Mount Vernon and the Dole Center. So I wasn't out in the streets marching because I've got another platform that I'm trying to work about all this ongoing social and economic injustice. So that's what I was working on during the march. But I kept seeing and hearing reports about the fact that wherever these marchers were congregating, they were bringing voter registration forms with them. They were proselytizing their colleagues and their youth cadre to say, And guess what? I've heard it. I've heard it more than once. We've all heard it. Those Marjory Stoneman Douglas students, when they would end most of their speeches, they'd say, if you're not with us, watch out, because we're coming and we're the voters.
Right.
And that's the catchphrase that, to me, is going to motivate that generation. We are the voters. You can't vote if you don't register. And if they're bringing registration forms to their marches, and if they have already internalized and understood that I'm not just marching in the streets, I'm going into the voting booth,
Yes.
then what you're saying is correct.
Right. If they can succeed in turning the House in the 2018 election, but not just getting a Democratic majority, but electing Democratic candidates who are responsive to progressive goals, that would make a major change, and that would provide institutional change. You know, it's not enough to elect Democrats if they are pseudo-Republicans. They're going to have to elect people who are going to say, we need broad-based gun control. We need to protect the DACA youth. We need to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. So there are some people like that. I have to tell you, at the rally, I'm watching, there's a 50-member, all-woman drum corps banging away, very impressive. And they're all wearing these powder blue T-shirts, March for Our Lives, and dancing in front of them, I'd swear, it was Letitia James with a cowbell.
Okay, that's our public advocate for the city of New York. Now, to get political quickly, I am seeing that with the next political cycle, there are a number of women who are positioning themselves in the forefront in the city of New York to challenge Bill de Blasio or succeed Bill de Blasio as mayor. And I think Letitia James is one. I believe the former city council president, Mark Viverito,
Yes.
might be putting herself in that particular position.
Cynthia Nixon is
She has already
she's
joined
already
the
for
race
that.
for governor.
Right.
So the whole Me Too movement has translated beyond sexual harassment to political disenfranchisement. And so women are now running for office in huge numbers. And guess what? As much as we're seeing David Hogg from Parkland, we're seeing Emma
Gonzalez.
Right.
And I've been watching a few of the cable channels, and I've been seeing 2 and 3 young women, and among them a very articulate black female who said, just because I'm black doesn't mean I'm not a student at Marjory Stoneman Douglas.
Right.
And during the rally, they had Martin Luther King's 11-year-old granddaughter saying, I have a dream that's enough is enough. Now I'm going, okay. And there was a young man from Washington, D.C., his twin brother had been slain by a gun violent robber trying to rob them while they were on their way home from school. And he says, I'm here to speak for all those other young people who have to worry about being shot, dying on their way to schools every day. It's not mass slaughter, but it happens in our communities nonstop. We're part of this let's end gun violence. And so the fact that this is crossing racial lines, the fact that the Stoneman Douglas young people are actually actively reaching out to say, it's not just about mass shootings in white suburban schools. It's about gun violence across the country. I'm just so happy to hear these young people. I mean, I'm impressed. I don't get impressed very easily. I'm telling you, low-key, laid back. And you got to do a lot to make me go, oh, wow. I don't go, oh, wow, very often, folks. But Ray, you had a couple of points you wanted to make.
You brought up a very important point, I think. These two groups, the Me Too movement and the anti-gun thing, are coalescing to provide a stronger base for protest and change.
Political activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good thing, because I'm not really sure how much momentum either one would have gotten by themselves.
Unfortunately, sexual harassment and gun violence are not going away. And as you know from Columbine and from Connecticut, it's going to happen again and again, and it's going to recharge.
It is, but I think it's going to diminish. I mean, there are a lot of men that are going to think twice
You're talking about sexual
I'm
harassment.
talking about sexual harassment. There are a lot of communities that are going to also think twice about their ability to carry arms, whether concealed or exposed, because their kids are dying.
Well, one of the things I'm hoping these young people in the streets bring to light, which it has been mentioned in any of the rallies, is the fact that there was this bill that was working its way through the Senate that was going to allow for concealed carry of weapons across state lines. So if you were allowed to carry a
That's a
weapon,
court.
if you were
Isn't that a
allowed to
court case?
carry in your
It's
state,
a
court
they
case.
were going to pass this law saying, no, New York, if my guy comes into your state, you can't arrest him for carrying a concealed
Universal
weapon.
reciprocity.
Well, you know what? We need to make sure that that gets highlighted and gets killed, deader than a door
I
in
think
hell.
that's also in coming in the courts.
agree.
Yeah, and so
That's
you
why
think there's a court case
Yeah.
already challenging it?
No.
No. My
Present
point is,
challenging
I
the
don't. I
restrictions.
do not want. I don't challenging the restriction.
Challenging
Well,
the
fine.
restrictions,
Well, hopefully,
yeah,
hope
but
they
what
lose that. But my point is, they're not even waiting for that. They're trying to pass a bill to make it legal,
Right,
as
like
opposed to
driver's
challenging
licenses.
that. And I'd much rather have them kill that bill. So that they can't say, oh, well, we can do it because guess what? Congress just passed a law saying it's legal. So that's not, we can't afford to let that happen.
That scares the devil
Yeah.
out of me because
Yeah.
now I only have to worry about the criminals that might be carrying guns. And if they pass that, I'm going to have to worry about who the heck is, road rage. If I bang into somebody, are they going to pull out a gun and shoot me?
In 1976, I was working at a cigarette candy delivery truck. I was driving a truck, and there's a holdup at the warehouse, and there's gunfire, and all the workers were just scattered. And the boss comes out and says, "Why are you guys running away? I got a gun." And we said, "That's why we ran."
And what do you do if everybody pulls out a gun? There are going to be bullets flying
They
all over the
estimate
place?
that
No,
when
I'm sorry.
police, highly trained police fire, 80% of the bullets don't hit. They hit other things.
That's true. That's
And
true.
you want teachers with guns? 80% of the bullet in a crowded school, 80% of the bullets are going to hit other people.
I've never been to a teachers' conference.
So to bring it back around, them crossing state lines with concealed weapons and all that crazy nonsense, the coverage of these marches, the coverage of these young people, we talked about them being demonized by the far right, but there's a headline that I really wanted to talk to you about, the unsubtleness of trying to smear these young people. The local New York Post, Rupert Murdoch outlet folk, if that tells you anything. David Hogg, one of the four leaders of the March for Our Lives from Parkland. Headline, David Hogg having trouble getting into college after high school. Wow, you would think that that would mean the kid not doing too bright, can't do too well because he's having trouble getting into school. And the lead is some states in California, colleges in California, apparently not impressed by the Parkland High School's shooting survivor, blah, 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 blah. He has been rejected by 4 University of California campuses, and they named the campuses. And according to the UC site, University of California site, a minimum 3.4 GPA, grade point average, is required for non-California residents to get in. The next line, down in the middle, the Florida teen has a 4.2 GPA, so his grade point average is not what's keeping him out of the school, according to their requirements. But there are a number of other issues that might be involved. But by the way, he was also accepted by Cal State San Marcos and Cal Poly, plus colleges in his own home state. So the twist is he's not having trouble getting into college. He's already been accepted by at least 3 colleges, maybe more. It just maybe that he applied to a whole lot of colleges, as young people do, and some of them just said, no, we got other people that we want. But it's not because he might be mentally deficient, as they're seeming to try to imply with this headline, folk. But that's the tenor of the coverage of the people who are trying to minimize these young people. They're trying to minimize them in any way they can. And the reason they're trying to minimize them is because these young people have hit with such a huge presence. They have been all over the media, and they have been articulate as hell in voicing what they want. And what they want is change, and they want gun control.
You know something? The Justice Stevens, retired Justice Stevens, it was the op-ed, it was in today's
Yes.
Times. And interesting, what he accuses, he says the NRA has basically hijacked the United States Constitution, hijacked the Second Amendment.
He's
Well,
correct.
you know, when
He's correct. There's
Yeah.
no two ways about that.
For 200 years, you were allowed to control guns. For 200 years, the Supreme Court, Congress, everybody believed that the purpose of the Second Amendment was to have weapons within the militia. It's only since 2008 that a right-wing cabal appointed by Reagan and the Bushes took over the Supreme Court that all of a sudden, and this is a group bought and paid for by the NRA, all of a sudden we shouldn't regulate guns.
Look,
all of a sudden,
they
Second
got
Amendment
so
sacred.
they got so bad about this. They got in such control that they managed to get a law passed saying that the Center for Disease Control could not research the evidence of the damage that guns and weapons might cause in this country. That's how bad and how much control they got on the United States. We can't even research this as part of a health issue. How screwed up is that? I started to say something else, but how screwed up is that when you can't even research that? So part of the Florida bill that the kids got passed 1 month after the shooting was to allow the CDC to at least be able to that was included in the last supposed gun control, not gun control, but the last bill that was going to look at the gun issue that the Congress passed, which the kids said, oh, that's all you can do for us? So anyway, we have maybe like 3 minutes left. Do we want to stay on this or do we want to segue to some of the New York issues that we were thinking of trying to talk about?
We can segue. But then we'll get into something that we'll want to continue to discuss.
Of course,
You'll have to come back.
Take longer than 3 minutes.
Yeah, but we can always
But
come
we
back.
certainly can.
We can always
We
do it.
certainly can.
Alan,
You're always welcome.
I sent you an email. Do you recall it was
Yes.
an issue up in the Bronx about speaking of abolition and slavery and the aftermath of slavery, the whole bit about black history and teaching black history. In February, there was an issue that took place in the New York City school in the Bronx.
Yeah.
Give us a little background on it.
There was an English teacher who was having her class study about the Harlem Renaissance. And the principal, it seems, told this English teacher, you're not a history teacher, you should be doing literature, not history. And of course, the problem, of course, is the principal's apparently unaware of what the curriculum in Engaged New York is. Because one, in English, in the ELA classes, they are supposed to be reading non-fictional material. So non-fictional history of the Harlem Renaissance is part of the curriculum. Coupling that with the poetry of the Harlem Renaissance, Claude McKay and Langston Hughes, that's what she's supposed to be teaching.
In 40 seconds, let's buttonhole it. They had a petition saying she's actually
The kids had a petition.
saying we got to get rid of this principal.
The kids did this. And kids are becoming more and more empowered. That's the message.
That's the
And
message. Kids are being empowered. We're going to revisit this bit about
old people
what to
like
teach.
us have to support these kids.
All right. So this has been Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
Dr. Alan
Dr.
Singer,
Alan
thanks
Singer.
for joining us. And you know what, folks? Alan probably will be back again soon. We'll catch you the next time. Catch us on YouTube, Media Watch EVT. And see you the next time.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you.